Mass Effect. It's a series of video games we're all familiar with, or perhaps not. But the fact is, few other games are as beloved. The world portrayed is as visually striking and diverse as the landscape is complex. The various species of sentient aliens are each fascinating in their own right, with unique appearances, clever cultural designs, and plenty of hidden secrets to accompany them. There is a well-conceived and realistic political system, creating a background of cross-species interactions which gives the games their highly recognizable aesthetic. On top of this backdrop, spectacular characters and mostly cohesive plots weave a tale that holds a special place in my heart and in the hearts of many other fans. In this great expanse of the Milky Way galaxy, you too have the power to impact the story as a whole, drastically changing its outcomes and feeling. For this is perhaps what makes Mass Effect most loved, the agency it grants to the player. Will you kill the Rachni Queen, sacrificing your own personal virtue and losing a potential ally at the same time? Or will you set her free, taking the chance that a race of angry hive mind bugs will again attempt to cleanse the galaxy? Your decision here completely changes the entire course of galactic history, but also the life of your character. Save the Rachni Queen and you have a chance to live. Kill her and you are doomed to die, no matter your other decisions. A true sense of freedom is created through these decisions. Add to that your ability to travel across the galaxy, visiting whichever planets you choose, whenever you choose, and you truly feel as though you are on a grand adventure in space. This is by design, but I wonder how many people who ever played these games stop to consider the philosophical depth therein. By this I don't mean the trolley problem equivalents presented repeatedly over the course of the story, but rather I mean the underlying messages to be found. You might see a swashbuckling adventure when you play Mass Effect, but I see more. I see a great battle of metaphysical forces being waged in the very spirit of the story. A war waged between the forces of tradition and progress, a grand historical narrative, eerily reflective of the real world, a cycle of birth, life, fading, death, and rebirth. This is a much deeper tale than it is given credit for, a mythical tale, in fact, and its mysteries are revealed through knowledge of the principles which drove its creation, whether knowingly or unknowingly. In order to assist me in my explanation, I will be drawing from the works of a few different philosophers, thinkers that will reveal many of these mysteries hidden within Mass Effect, though we'll be focusing exclusively on the trilogy. One, because it contains a complete and interconnected arc, but also for my own sanity, the less said about Andromeda the better. But let us continue. How do you think of history? It seems like a rather strange question, but it is crucially important in understanding philosophy, especially in answering questions which relate to the material world. Perhaps you think of names and dates, or maybe you think about a gradual stream of scientific progress creating better and better societies. However, to better understand Mass Effect, the best conception of history was provided to us by the Hindus. They describe 4 ages, or yugas: Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali, or in Western terms, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each characterized by a further descent from eternal metaphysics into blind and selfish materialism. Yet, these ages do not decline into an apocalypse from which the world is never reborn as seen in the biblical book of Revelation. Rather, they repeat over and over again in cyclical fashion. However, to borrow again from Guenon, the cycle of history does not merely exist in these grand increments. Each age in itself is broken into many fractal cycles of the whole, with 4 ages slowly declining, all within itself. Guenon says, quote, "Within each of the great periods of which we have spoken, it is possible to go further and distinguish secondary phases constituting so many subdivisions of it. And since each part is analogous after its own fashion to the whole, these subdivisions reproduce, so to speak, on a much smaller scale, the general course of the greater cycle in which they are contained. Thus, consider the civilizations of the past and how they relate to one another. It is, of course, not the civilizations themselves that experience these cycles, but the ideas and aesthetics of each are continually dredged up from the annals of history. The United States of America, for its primary influence, looked to the Roman Republic. The Italian fascists, too, looked to Rome, but rather to the Empire than to the Republic. Yet, what does this say about Mass Effect? Each yuga lasts for a period of 12,000 divine years, and adding together each of the four, you might find a rather familiar number appearing again. The result, 48,000 years, is eerily close to the proposed 50,000-year Reaper cycle. Is this coincidence? I don't know. I was unable to find any information about Hindu cosmology as a potential influence on the creation of the Reapers, but it seems strange that the results would be so similar. Maybe this is just indication that the earthly order tends to reflect the divine order in all things. Or maybe we do live in the Matrix. Who knows? Regardless, Kali Yuga is defined as the age of decadence, the time in which people are the furthest from their spiritual roots. This age is reflected in Mass Effect. Throughout the galaxy, there are pirates, slavers, drug traffickers, corrupt politicians, and all manner of lost people finding pleasure in the lowest possible forms. They tend not to ask questions or search for an escape from the period of crisis. In particular, in Mass Effect 3, you are forced to convince each of the galaxy's major players to provide you with some form of assistance in the Reaper War. Yet they remain self-absorbed, lacking the vision to see the bigger picture, and they insist that assistance will only be provided for a price, a sign of their material modes of thought. Gain and loss, good and bad, all things come to be measured by the odd metric of how much stuff one possesses. In this way, the higher knowledge is lost, and the danger posed by the cycle is mostly ignored. So, it seems fairly obvious that the course of the trilogy takes place in the period of the Kali Yuga, and the end of that particular period would be the end of the Reaper War. Guenon backs this up. The period of this dark age, the state of dissolution of which it is impossible to emerge otherwise than by a cataclysm, since it is not a readjustment that is necessary at this stage, but a complete renovation. Thus appear the Reapers, harbingers of doom. Literally, in fact. Just as is typical of mythical cataclysms, the Reapers exist beyond the domain of living beings, impossible to reach. Yet, intellectually, they also remain beyond the comprehension of rational minds. Sovereign states and Mass Effect 1. We simply are. The Kali Yuga can then be seen. There is no beginning or end, and the drive to push towards a brighter, better future only ends up in exactly the same place you started. The Protheans conquered the galaxy, but either way were doomed to fail. No matter the ideological background or the origin stories of the current civilization, it collapses in the face of eternal order, the Kali Yuga coming around again to see the end of the Iron Age. Seeking to understand the Reapers or even to build the Crucible will not achieve victory over the Reapers. So what does, really, There are two primary interpretations of the game's plot. Which you believe is correct in some sense showcases your own philosophical learning, and mostly what you think of Nietzsche's will to power, whether you view it positively or negatively, or whether you think it has any relevance at all in this matter. What's more, the very two paths offered for Shepard's morality, on top of changing the tone of the story as a whole, reflect perfectly these opposing visions. Transcendence plays a major role in both views, though one sees it as occurring universally while the other sees it particularly. And lurking in the background is the question, can one truly overcome the cycle, or is it set in stone to be repeated until the end of time? The French Revolution remains today perhaps the most important conflict in modern history. There we saw the advent of what would later become the foundation of the all-consuming Western ideology of today: liberty, equality, fraternity. Each in itself represents a piece of universalism, a fragment of the belief system of the international ruling class. Our Mass Effect analog to the ruling class is self-evidently the Citadel Council and other politicians there. Yet, you may recognize that during your Paragon run, the Council and other members of the ruling class seem to care little for the liberty, equality, and fraternity of the people. This is what creates the fascinating battle between Shepard and the Council. Each side of the debate believes the other is insufficient in their ability to protect the people. Not only that, but also incorrect in their means. The swashbuckling, rampant heroism of Shepard directly contrasts with the slow, safe approach of the Council. The transition into Mass Effect 2 showcases this clearly, where, following the battle with Sovereign, the Council has elected to hide the existence of the Reapers, rather than make that knowledge public. They want to avoid a public panic, the desire to calm the startled flock. But what's most important to recognize here is the mentality of this ruler-type personality. They believe we have moved beyond such things as war, pain, suffering, and thus will do everything in their power to pretend that they don't exist. You see, the existence of the world's horrors directly disproves the liberal thesis that the world becomes progressively better over time, for these things will always exist in one form or another, regardless of the nature of the ruling regime. There are some principles which exist eternally, beyond space and time. Beyond the simple materialism of the world, liberalism sees. Nation, brotherhood, the transcendent solar soul, and other such things are on the list. These things exist in contradiction to the favored ideals of liberalism, liberty, equality, and fraternity. But what of this end of history? Here is a matter to consider. How has the post-French Revolution changed from the world that came before? One way in particular that is of striking importance is the approach taken towards traditional knowledge. The modern man scoffs at the knowledge of his forefathers, believing himself to be enlightened, and those who came before to be ignorant at best and savagely, evilly irrational at worst. Of course, when you take into account the cyclic nature of history, conceiving of an end of history is rather foolish. How could so much progress be made that the history of ideas simply ends? For if history travels in a circle, so much progress forward would simply lead back to the starting point. Yet, In 2 of the 4 endings in the finale of Mass Effect 3, one can see a proposed end to history, an end where the strife of the past is superseded by the universal nature of the profound liberal ideology. We have all heard from utilitarians arguments for the greater good, and many of them are fond of mentioning that sometimes there must be sacrifice to achieve a brighter future. This is the concept at the heart of progressive thought. In order to reach that better future, there must be a sacrifice, and that sacrifice involves the destruction of the old to make way for the new. For of course, that which is new and bright and shiny is better than that which is old, stolid, and traditional. Isn't that just the logical thing to believe? The answer is, well, yes, if you're a liberal. The Destroy ending, quite obviously, pictures this exact paradigm. The destruction of all synthetics, and the Reapers are gone. Sure, you lose your friends, Edie, the Geth, and so on, but it's all for the greater good. But that's just another trolley problem, and I promised I would avoid the discussion of personal ethics here, as it simply is not that interesting. However, there are some other interesting matters to consider in the Destroy ending as a continuation of the discussion earlier of the end of history. Often, in these left-leaning dialectics, there is some sort of revolutionary ethos. You definitely see this in Marx, the presence of a tyranny which the people must rise up against as one to be freed from its clutches. The tyranny, as presented by Marx, is seemingly insurmountable and thus requires extraordinary force to oppose it. The elimination of all who would attempt to hold back the revolution, whether they be tyrants themselves or merely useful idiots for the tyranny as Marx would perceive them. That's Cerberus in Mass Effect terms. Here, the Reaper cycle can be seen as representing a traditional formation, one that has existed for untold millions of years, in fact. The opposition is the revolution of the working classes. Now, if, like me, you really hate communism, you might find it a bit of a hard pill to swallow. Mass Effect's generally favored ending, as far as I can work out at least, being a revolutionary message. But I promise it's not as bad as it seems, because, after all, it's only the message of the art, not the art itself. And plenty of communists have created good art in the past. I mean, just take a look at Star Wars. If that's not an upper-class liberal's fantastical dream of a fascistic government being taken down by the plucky working class, I don't know what is. That, in itself, does not make Star Wars bad. Again, it all depends on how you play Shepard throughout the course of the game. Renegade or Paragon. If your pick is Renegade, this decision in the end makes little sense, but for a Paragon, it is excellent. In the end, the enemy is vanquished, and the revolution is complete, sacrifices and all. A period of rebuilding then takes place in the aftermath, with a better world to be seen after the downfall of this ancient tradition. Thus, the Reapers are considered by the Paragon as a moral inconsistency, an evil thing which must be wiped from existence, a perfect one-to-one view of how progressives view tradition. It is not the act of destruction that makes the Reapers evil for the Paragon, for if they existed in their fashion, eliminating the backward reactionaries, the Paragon would not care. The Reapers' opposition, even if it is not understood by the Paragon, is an opposition to Universalism, a multicultural future that every sane person would support. Wouldn't they? But the Destroy ending is not the only one with this revolutionary character. As you might have figured out if you are the sort of person who likes to think ahead, the synthesis is basically like the destroy ending in every sense, only on steroids. In terms of framing, it too is revolutionary. Only instead of the Fukuyama interpretation you saw in the opening quote, this did not mean the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth would end. You get the true Marxist interpretation. The workers' revolt is complete, and the new utopia has been achieved. No sacrifice was needed, except Shepard, that is, and now the people are beyond simply being accepting of one another. They are interconnected in every way, like one great organism. It's not the Borg, but it's the societal equivalent. But speaking of Shepard's sacrifice, this is a good time to focus on our main character, as he is kind of the only interesting thing about the synthesis ending beyond taking the points I already made in the destroy ending and roiding them up a little bit. Shepard here is a sort of stand-in for the revolution, its ultimate symbol. He is not a hero in himself, but in the fact that he represents an idea greater than himself, he becomes something more. This is important because Shepard is not a politician, nor is he particularly upper class or political. It makes him inoffensive, accepting of everyone and everything, but tough on those who would oppose the new way promised. His character and personal importance are actually of little relevance when compared to the role he fills as the archetypal working man doing heroic things for the people. For Paragon Shepard isn't taking his actions for the benefit of humanity or for the system's alliance, but for all those deemed to be part of the oppressed by Reapers class. He opposes oppression because he is a good person who acts on behalf of all people, not only himself or his species. Paragon answers often lead you to be culturally sensitive and all other such ridiculous things, and the synthesis ending is the perfect end for such a character. Shepard lived for the revolution, his very soul coming to represent it, and he dies to complete the revolution as well, bringing life beyond the trap of the cycle of history to end it. And at the end of history, one doesn't have to worry about the small things or even the big ones, for everything is taken care of for you, and the world has truly transcended in the literal sense through the crucible of the revolution. Think of great men. Alexander, Genghis Khan, Charlemagne, Julius Caesar. Men like these, in a sense, transcend time. They can all be listed together despite the vast cultural, temporal, and geographical differences between them because they all hold some intangible trait in common. Identifying it literally is a bit complicated, but one way to consider it is as will to power. These four, among many others, are excellent examples because they, through force of will and ambition, conquered vast swaths of land, crafting empires where there had previously been little at all. Where there had been chaos, there was now order, and where there had been weakness, there was now strength. These men have what Julius Evola would have called a solar soul. Also, great men are characterized generally by the time of their appearance. During the ages of collapse, even of relative collapse, great men are born, men whose duty it is to guide the populace through the chaos, or to reframe the verbiage as previously when I spoke about the council, the populace is the flock of sheep, and the great man, the shepherd. Now that can't be coincidence, can it? Thus, as opposed to the lovely universalism of the paragon shepherd who does not celebrate his own greatness, the renegade shepherd is defined by it. He does not fight for the Alliance or for Cerberus. He fights for his own greatness, not for mere material gain though, but for glory and desire to embody a truly heroic sense of being, as one of Homer's heroes might have. You can get the sense by the dialogue options that Renegade Shepherd is the highest degree of Chad. He does not care that others attempt to hold him back in the weak and lunar intergalactic age, striking out on his own with intent to achieve great acclaim. Yet this particular characterization of Shepherd darkens the story considerably. No longer does there seem to be this united effort of cooperation, and instead everyone opposes Shepherd in his crusade to survive the Kali Yuga. Mass Effect becomes a rather bleak reality, and the doom of civilization seems inevitable, with the only escape being the absolutely supreme will of the heroic man. For this is Shepherd's role in the Renegade Run. A man out of his time. A Golden Age man born during the Iron Age. This is Shepherd's role as the great man of history, the one to uplift himself, not his universal society. He takes a particularist perspective, recognizing that the great man is the only one who can guide the plebeians through the cataclysm, but to do so he must transcend his existence to become something more, a truly mythical hero. If it's transcendence you want, look no further, because the control ending is the very definition of transcendence. Here, Renegade Shepherd's will to power is so supreme that he manages to conquer not only the Reapers, but also the cycle itself. Birth, death, and rebirth are inevitable, but not for the man strong enough to conquer them. In the cases of Caesar, Alexander, and others previously mentioned, they conquered the cycle, achieving immortality via historical remembrance. Their achievements were so substantial that their accomplishments echo through the halls of history. Yet, Shepherd exists above and beyond these figures. The duty was his to lead the people of the galaxy through the Kali Yuga, to be the hero none of them could ever dream of being. He was once a man just like all the others, but he was able to stretch above and beyond what simple life he had. Judging by his coincidentally given name, Shepherd was destined for greatness. To again mention Homer's great heroes, Shepherd has the blood of the gods flowing through his veins in the sense that he was born with the will to power. Thus, Shepherd, though he bears some similarities to the historical figures like Caesar and Alexander, has far more in common with the great man of myth. Not merely conquering men and creating empires, Shepherd does battle with titans, who take the form of the Reapers. He is not just a great man of history, but a mythical figure, as demonstrated by Mass Effect's final scene where the child asks to hear stories about the Shepherd. This only further proves that Shepherd is a man of the Hindu Golden Age, which was also known as the Age of the Gods. People were ruled by the gods directly and governed by the purest ideals. The people, too, were above those of today, embodying the spirit of vitalism, and Shepherd is one of those people, despite not living in the Golden Age himself. Nietzsche wrote on the Übermensch, or Superman. In his work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, this man is interpreted in multiple ways. He spoke of the Übermensch as an alternative to decaying Christian morality which no longer supported the West, and this man would rise up in the place of this dying civilization, like Muhammad leading the first Muslim jihads, or indeed Alexander leading the resurgence of Hellenism. The rebirth of morality in the society of nihilism is often visualized as a conquest of some sort, and in Shepard's case, it is no different. The best interpretation of the Übermensch, making it applicable across time and space regardless of cultural particulars, would perhaps be to liken this Superman to the hero who arises during the Great Cataclysm. This is Shepard, who appears just as the time of death has arrived, and the meaninglessness of this reality seems all-consuming, only to strike back at the heart of the lunar world, reviving the spirit of the Golden Age and sometimes sacrificing himself in the process. Shepard's ability to control the Reapers, to subjugate them to his will, is more than simple conquest. In fact, his will to power was so substantial that he became the subsistence of the cycle, a transcendence in the like of the mythical hero Heracles, who after completing his 12 labors and many other great deeds besides, ascended from his mortality to become a god. Shepard, in this sense, completely follows the guideline of the Golden Age narrative arc, having accomplished all the deeds he could in the realm of the mortals and becoming the savior of the galaxy, only to become something more than he was before, a physical realization of a phenomenon which we today can only conceive of as aesthetic. It is a proper deification. Let's talk for a moment about Oswald Spengler. Perhaps you've heard of this man, but if you haven't, the face really tells you everything you need to know. Nonetheless, I shall explain a little for the uninitiated. Spengler was an early 20th century thinker primarily interested in civilizational decline and cyclic history, famous for his distinctly dark and dismal vision of the doomed Western civilization. His best-known work, Decline of the West, was published in 2 volumes, but I'll give you a taste for his type of thought with a few famous or perhaps infamous quotes, just so you don't have to read it or any of his other work if you don't want to. We are born into this time and must bravely follow the path to the destined end. There is no other way. Our duty is to hold on to the lost position, without hope, without rescue, like that Roman soldier whose bones were found in front of a door in Pompeii, who, during the eruption of Vesuvius, died at his post because they forgot to relieve him. That is greatness. That is what it means to be a thoroughbred. The honorable end is the one thing that cannot be taken from a man. That's from a shorter work called Men and Technics. And this one, history is direction, but nature is extension. Ergo, everyone gets eaten by a bear. Then, this gem of a quote to brighten your day. Optimism is cowardice. I suppose you can probably see where I'm going with all of this. The continuation ending is the last and certainly the most hated of the different paths, but it is also the most misunderstood, so I encourage you to embrace your inner Spengler here, that dark part of your soul which says it's all over, and try to see the wisdom in the continuation. To Spengler, the end is inevitable, but to fight against it, despite recognizing the futility of doing so, is heroic. This describes the battle with the Reapers up until the point where Shepard meets the Catalyst, at which point he finds himself being ordered to choose a path. But what good would destroying the Reapers do? Surely they were created for some purpose, and destroying them would only doom the galaxy forever. What about synthesizing the synthetics and organics? Again, we run into the same problem. Why are the Reapers here? Or the control ending? Once again, the same question holds as a solid refutation. Why? What is the purpose of the cycle? G.K. Chesterton's fence analogy is perhaps somewhat overused, but here I believe it to be applicable. It goes like this. If you are walking in the forest and come across a fence that appears to have no purpose, is not surrounding anything or blocking off any property, only freestanding, don't take it down. You don't know why the fence is there, and a reasonable person might have any number of reasons for building a freestanding fence in the middle of a forest. In other words, trust tradition. Trust in those who came before you. They weren't stupid, and you are not any smarter than they were. This is the moral lesson of the continuation ending. The Leviathans, if you remember them, those giant organic versions of the Reapers, created the Reapers to monitor relations between synthetics and organics. Being machines, they would continue to fulfill their core code, and thus would be monitoring synthetic and organic relations even during Shepard's cycle. It is best not to interfere with the natural order, for it has a reason to function in the way that it does. Yet, in this instance, still, Shepard remains a hero. Though he might not be the Ubermensch, he is just the same as Caesar or Alexander, a heroic figure who led his people. He did not lead them to victory, but that does not make him any less heroic. Spengler would conceive of this as the most heroic possible act for a warrior such as Shepard, to look upon his doom and accept its inevitability, but refuse to compromise in the face of destruction.